You're listening to the Speaking Tongues podcast. I'm your host, El Charisse. Each week, I sit down to a conversation with multilinguals where we discuss and celebrate language, life, and culture through our own perspectives. Episode 65, Speaking Spanish, Italian, and Mandarin. Hello, language lovers. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Speaking Tongues, the podcast and conversation with multilinguals. This week, I'm so happy to be joined by Abigail and Audrey from You Don't Say podcast. We're talking about Spanish, Italian, and Mandarin, but also about culture, travel, and of course, food. In this episode, we talk about growing up in multicultural neighborhoods in Australia and in England, and how those early encounters played a part in how they viewed the world. We discuss being inspired by different cultures enough to want to live in a different part of the world, learning other languages and how that can enhance the living abroad experience, and how to deal with culture shock in new places. We also talk about how they both became inspired to teach English and how their podcast, You Don't Say, became an outlet for exploration and fun international culture chats. Big thank you to Abigail and Audrey for having this conversation with me and sharing parts of your language journey with us. If you enjoy this episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the Speaking Tongues podcast on Apple Podcasts, or like and subscribe on YouTube so that other language lovers like ourselves can find the show. And if you've been a longtime listener of the show or even a recent listener, you can now support the show on buymeacoffee.com. Links to all platforms are in the show notes. Okay, let's chat. Welcome back to another episode of Speaking Tongues. I'm so excited to be here. Another 3-person episode. I'm here with Audrey and Abigail from You Don't Say podcast.
Hello.
How are you ladies?
We are good. We're excited.
Yeah.
I'm so excited to have you, and we're going to have so much fun. We have so much to talk about. I like to start each episode with the same question, and that is, what is your first language and which languages have you learned to speak?
Okay, I'll go first. So my first language is English, and over the many years of my life, I don't speak them all now, but I've learned to speak French, Spanish, Italian, Catalan, Brazilian Portuguese, Mandarin, and a little bit of Korean.
Whoa. Impressive.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay. And me, I grew up in Australia, so I guess you could say I speak Australian English. And I speak Italian, Spanish, and a bit of Catalan. So the list is a little bit shorter.
That's amazing. And I want to point out that we've got 3 different Englishes here.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So that's like, and it's like, before I started doing the show, I was like, English, English is English, and it's, different accent like here and there. But now I'm like, wait, all of our Englishes are different. So I always like to think about those moments when I talk to people who, speak English from a different country and in a different way. And it's so exciting, I think.
Yeah, I like it too.
So to both of you, what languages did you hear spoken in your home or in your community when you were growing up?
So at home we spoke English, but my parents are actually from Jamaica. They moved to the UK when my mum was 10, my dad was 14. And so Jamaican patois was always spoken at home. Like you'd hear it, maybe not a full conversation, but the odd word or sentence. And I would hear my parents also speak it with my grandparents as well. So it's a really common language in our family. But I was thinking today, also when I was growing up, my best friend lived next door to me, and her family were from India, and they spoke Hindi at home. And we spent a lot of time together. And so I would pick up bits of Hindi as well.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Was your neighborhood very multicultural, or was it like very West Indian and
I'd say it was quite multicultural. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool. And Audrey.
Yeah, well, my mum is also a migrant. So her family moved out to Australia when she was about 12. And she didn't speak a word of English when she came to Australia. And so I grew up with her speaking Dutch to her mom and hearing that spoken, to my grandparents. So every time I was in my grandparents' house, I would hear a lot of Dutch. It's a very familiar sounding language to me. I pick it straight away when I hear it, but unfortunately, she didn't pass it on to me, which is a bit of a shame. But and a bit like Abigail as well. I grew up in a pretty multicultural city. It's a steel city in Australia, so lots of migrants came for work, and the most common migrants were usually Southern Europeans and particularly Italians. So in my street, there were quite a few Italians, and we were playing with one family who were really classic Italian family. So they had the house with the olive trees on the side, the wine cellar, and like I think they even had some salami hanging up in their cellar as well, like really like Italian. So I think that's kind of, where the Italian fascination came in as well for me. Yeah.
With the people that you grew up with in your community, who did have parents from Southern Europe, did your peers learn the languages that of their parents and their grandparents as well?
I don't think so. I don't really remember many kids speaking other languages, and I think maybe some of the kids were speaking some Italian, or at least maybe responding back to maybe the parents speaking to them Italian but responding back into English. This is my vague memory of it, but I don't remember in my mind many kids actually speaking other languages. It's kind of a bit sad, and people often ask me, oh, why didn't you learn Dutch? Why did your mum? I just think it was another time. In those days, the focus was so much on like becoming Australian and integrating. I hate to say it, but it probably was like maybe a little bit of ignorance that it was important to speak other languages too in the past. Like it's not like today where it's more accepted to be bilingual, trilingual. I think there was in the past maybe less interest in it.
Yeah, it seems like it was hard for families to, like, even in the US too, and maybe in the UK as well, like to, that pressure to assimilate was really, like if you really think you're not going to be able to feed your family because you can't, express yourself to your boss, and like you don't want your kids to have to go through that either. That's
yeah. No, it's a really big issue, I think. Thinking a bit about it, like even if I think about my mother being married to an Australian, she probably would have felt uncomfortable speaking Dutch to us in front of my father who didn't speak it. Like if I really, and I know that still happens now, people feel uncomfortable if they don't understand the other parents' language. So I imagine in the past, that idea would have been even more like, my father does not speak any other languages. So wouldn't have been in his thinking to do that.
Right. When you were in school, to both of you, when you were in school, what languages were you exposed to in school? Did you have options for different languages? Was there like the one language? Was there a language that you were required to take or that you were interested in taking and you had to take it throughout your school years?
So when I started secondary school, there wasn't an option. You had to study French.
Mm.
I think like I was quite excited to learn a new language, so it wasn't too bad, but then my excitement kind of waned after a while because I found that the traditional method of teaching with like textbooks, some of them really old textbooks, was just a bit boring. But I got through my classes because my teacher was lovely. But in my second year, we started to learn Spanish. And I think that's when things really changed for me because my Spanish teacher was just really passionate about the language and the culture and making the language come alive. So, one thing that we were really lucky to be able to take part in was a pen pal program. So, there was a school in Spain that was, they called it a British school. So, the students that went there were Spanish, but all of their lessons were in English. So, they had a really high level of English. And yeah, and we would get a pen pal from there, and every other month we would write them letters in Spanish and a little bit of English, and get these letters sent off by our teacher in this big parcel. And then a month or so later, we'd all get letters back, and sometimes they'd have photos in or gifts, and that made me so excited to learn Spanish.
So cool.
Yeah.
That's so sweet.
Loved it. And then the best thing was it didn't end there. When we got to third year of high school, we had the option to go out to Spain to meet our pen pals and to stay with them for a week. Yeah.
That's so cool. What was that like?
I felt a little bit scared at first because it was my first time away from home. But being there and hearing the language spoken all day and getting to try Spanish food and traveling around parts of Spain, it was awesome. Yeah, such a precious memory.
Wow, that's so cool. So Spanish was like your language. That's the language that really hooked you into.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's still really close to my heart now because even when I started learning, my paternal grandmother found out I was learning Spanish, and she actually lived in Cuba for quite a while. She went over there to work. And so whenever I saw her, she'd test me on bits of Spanish. She'd ask me to like go and get her something from the kitchen, or, she'd ask me questions. And that was so great.
That's so sweet. That's adorable. How about you, Audrey?
Well, studying languages definitely not given a lot of focus in Australia. We had compulsory 6 months of Italian and 6 months of German. That was it. That was it. I know that probably in some schools they do start to introduce a foreign language in primary school now. But when I was there was no foreign language in primary school. And then I did, I think, another year of Italian because it was a little bit like Abigail said. German was like a horrible class. The teacher couldn't control the kids, and they made fun of her, and it was horrible. But the Italian teacher was really fun, and the book was really cool. It was like these fun characters, and you had like different characters, and they did like different things. So throughout the book was like a comic book learning.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the 6 months, we even went to eat at the Italian. There was like a big Italian, I can't remember the name. It was like an Italian community center. And so we went there all together, eat Italian food. So, it's much more fun.
Yeah. Everything's better with food.
Yeah, exactly. So the idea was we had to order our food, in Italian. Very simple. We were all very shy trying to do it. But yeah, I remember there was like one guy at school who was learning. Because you could choose to study other subjects, but you had to get like special permission and get sent information and study remote, technically. And there was one guy at school studying Japanese. And then that's about it. Like I did my 1 year or so of Italian, and yeah, I don't think there was anybody doing languages in my school. It's completely,
Wow.
yeah, pretty poor. I don't think it's changed much in Australia, to be honest.
Really?
I don't know. I'd like to hear from other Australians, but yeah.
Do you think that we take language for granted as English speakers, in that, you know, maybe there's not a lot of emphasis on learning another language because we already have this powerhouse of English that, you know, so many people around the world can use, and maybe it's like a privilege that we take for granted?
I totally agree.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I hear it from people. Like they say, why do I need to learn another language? Everyone speaks English.
Right.
And it's so sad.
Yeah, I think so too. Especially when it comes to travel. Like I've heard people say like they won't travel someplace because they don't know the language. Okay, well, you have time to learn a couple of phrases to get you by, so why not? And then I've known people who go abroad, and they expect other people to speak English too. It's like, well, you're there.
Yeah.
It's
No, I mean, it's weird. I think sometimes, like when I think about Australia, like so culturally diverse, with so many people growing up with language spoken at home, but we didn't do anything with that value. I mean, I'd like to think it's changed, but yeah, the cultural richness that's there just kind of got, what's the word? I don't know, just squashed down.
Yeah.
And with the dominance of English being useful as well. I don't know. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, the honest truth is that if you do know other languages in Australia, they're not going to be useful. I mean, in Australia, you know, not really. At least if you lived in Europe, it's great. You can, at some stage, maybe in a work situation, you could use different languages. Obviously, it's easier to travel to the different countries. Australia is so isolated as well. So just to travel to another country, you know, like that speaks a different language, you're talking at least 6 hours of flight, 8 hours. So, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a bit sad.
Yeah, of course. I'm curious to know if both of you and your early exposure to other languages, either through your parents, your families, or through early education, how did that shape your interest in language? How did that shape your interest in travel and other cultures, and seeing and understanding how other people move through the world?
Yeah, I think it wasn't I didn't realize it at the time. The Italian learning experience had an impact. But I did see it as a fun language. So it definitely remained in my mind as something like, oh, it could be fun to speak, but never was like, I need to speak it, but it was like, oh, it's fun, Italian. I like it. And the Dutch, I once kind of tried to pull my mum's leg, teach me Dutch, and then like got stuck in saying the days of the week and thinking, oh my goodness, this is tough. So and she didn't really insist much either. So I just kind of left it. But I think the big thing is that when you're from, like in Australia, you definitely have that strong connection to Europe. You know, we all, so many of us, like probably, I don't know what percentage of the population come from Europe, whether it be Southern, Northern, whatever. So you feel that there's some part of your culture that's there. And I think it does wake up that curiosity to go traveling to Europe, to explore things. Maybe at the beginning, you don't think of learning the other languages, but you definitely get drawn back to Europe. So that's probably the first point of getting into it and wanting to travel.
Yeah.
Actually, when you mentioned that, when you were talking about travel and languages and getting into them because of travel, it made me think of the holidays that I did take with my parents abroad when I was younger. And it was like every country we went to, I always managed to pick up some of the language because a local person decided, I'm going to teach you how to say thank you. I'm going to teach you how to say hello. And it was really great using that little bit of language and seeing the reactions from people like, oh, you learn how to say this. That's really nice. You're really good.
Yeah.
Mm.
I have a story. Like I went to Ivory Coast when I was 11, or maybe I was 12, 11 or 12. I don't remember. It was a long time ago. And I was thinking about this recently, like, um, they speak French in Ivory Coast, and I don't think that it connected with my mind that like people in another country speak another language. But since I was so obsessed with French and like wanting to speak French like my whole life, I remember I knew like, basic words like, hello, goodbye, how are you, thank you, la 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 la. And I remember, and your story made me think of this, Abigail, when a woman, I was getting my hair braided and the woman asked like if I wanted the braids, like how I wanted them to be. And I said like petite. And she looked at me like, you speak French? And she just went on. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, I was a kid, like I didn't know. And but it made me feel like, wow, that's, and thinking about this as of, an adult with, the power of hindsight, I'm thinking like, that did a lot for me. That really did a lot for me and my curiosity, and a lot for my like desire to speak to people and speak their languages and meet people and see the world. Um and I always think like there's probably something like maybe like we don't really think of it, but there's probably something that like really galvanized us to make us want to, you know, travel so far from home. And what separates us who do that from the people who don't have that desire at all. It's like I'm just always thinking about that. Like
You mean like the desire to travel or to learn the language?
yeah, I mean, I
Or
think
both?
both. I think
Yeah.
both. Because I think, and maybe this is just the way I feel, like I think it's really hard to want to learn a language and not want to experience that culture as well. And I
Yeah.
think if you live in a place that's very diverse and cosmopolitan, like you may have, neighbors from India, so you may be able to, practice with them if you're learning an Indian language. But like if you don't, you have to go to the mountain. Like the mountain's not going to come to
Yeah.
you. So
Mm.
if you really are that keen on learning, Hindi or Bengali or Tamil or something, um, you have to go to India, or you have to go to Bangladesh, and you have to actually talk to people. So for me, I maybe that they're not so easily separated from one another. And I tend to kind of like think of travel and language like, as like best buddies. So they
Mm.
go hand in hand. So to Audrey, we talked, well, you mentioned before we recorded that you decided to move abroad from Australia.
Mm.
Um, and you moved abroad. Did you move abroad because you wanted to learn the language, or were you like ready to, start a new chapter of your life?
Yeah, I think, yeah, it wasn't like the number one goal, but I definitely saw it as kind of a secondary goal. It was something that I felt like I was really admired in other people, that they learned other languages, and I hadn't actually succeeded. I had a failed attempt trying to learn Chinese in my early 20s, but just realized it was impossible when living in Australia. It's like, this is not going to happen. And I had a friend who was like learning Spanish, and I think he traveled through South America. And I kept looking up to people who were doing things like that, and I thought, no, this is something I want to do in my lifetime. And yeah, it's probably, let's call it the crisis of the 30-year-old, okay, if I don't do this now, maybe I'm not going to do it. So particularly also for visa restrictions as well. And so, yeah, I just said, okay, I'm going to go to Europe. I looked at the options for working holiday visas, and the best options were yeah, Italy. It was like Italy, Germany, or France, and I just went with Italy because of the fascination with the language and the food, of course. Well, Abby and I are all about food.
We're foodies.
So,
Yeah.
so yeah, so it's like in my mind, it's like, I'm going to go there. It was an idea that a friend had given me. She had said, I'm thinking of going to Italy because she has Italian origins, and I'm going to go and teach English. And I was like, oh yeah, what a great idea. Like, you know, she just, when she said it, I was like, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. Like, I don't know if you have those moments in your life where someone says something, it's like, yes, that's it. That's the answer to what I've been looking for. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to go teach. I've got a business background. I'll teach business English. Let's give it a go and try to learn the language. I thought that I was going to pick it up, obviously, like it was going to be easy. I had no idea because I had not actually properly learned a language before. So here I am, 31 years old, thinking, I'm just going to pick up some Italian in my year abroad. Yeah, well, it was a bit harder than that.
How long do you think it was before you became comfortable with the language?
I would say it probably started to click after about 2-3 years. And
wow.
yeah, I probably the first year was pretty rough. I, didn't really know how to go about it. I didn't have a lot of time because I was working a lot. I'm teaching always in English, so you're not really fully immersed. So I could, do survival Italian. And I realized I was spending way too much time not actually speaking Italian. So I had to do something about it. And I ended up getting a serious language exchange with another guy. And I just kind of started like, okay, let's go through. What did I do at the weekend? I did this, like going through the same conversations and building the confidence to be able to have someone like listen and really get the sentences out, not just these words, and start to make it like into a conversation. And that was after about a year. And then after that, sort of like, okay, please be patient with me, but I'm going to like start speaking it. So yeah. It's sometimes that downside of being an English speaker too, because people feel, I'll speak English with you. I'll practice my English. And so I had to really push it, because I have friends in Italy who have not really learned Italian, and it's scary. I mean, it happens in many countries. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And Abigail, you've lived in a few places.
Yeah.
And so you've lived in China, in Spain?
Yeah. And
Italy? Okay.
Just those 3.
So that's 3. What was that like? What was that like with the language and the culture, just navigating it and learning them?
So I studied in Italy on a year abroad, and that was my first time in Italy. And I didn't find it too much of a culture shock being another European country. But I think I had to get used to people being really outgoing and really social outdoors, whereas in the UK, we spend a lot of time indoors. It's like you finish work, you go home, you finish studying, you go home, and that's it, in your house for the rest of the evening. So yeah, that was challenging for me. But I started to really love it, and I started to see that how much that socializing in the language was really improving my skills, because when I arrived in Italy, my Italian was rubbish, to be honest. I had to every time I needed something, I had to get my big dictionary out, because it didn't have a smartphone in those days. And
I remember.
look up vocabulary.
I had a little phrase book, like I'd like studied a little, God, basic questions.
So I have to look things up in the dictionary and just hope for the best when I tried to use it. But no, it was such a great year. And by the end of the year, I was so much more confident when it came to speaking. And I loved Italian culture. I was convinced I was going to live in Italy, but I'm not living there now. With Spain, it was for part of my year abroad. And also I loved it so much that I decided to go back and work there in Barcelona for a year. And what I guess I found challenging there was the fact that everything happened so much more later at night. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, we're going out for dinner. What time are we going out for dinner? 10 o'clock. Yeah, but I was hungry. Well, I'll be hungry at say 7:30. But again, I really started to love that cultural difference. And another thing that I really loved about living in Barcelona was they speak Catalan there. And I studied Catalan for 2 years at university. And it was so interesting seeing how the language was used. So I had a friend, for example, that was from a village a bit outside of Barcelona. And in her village, Catalan was the language that was spoken. And so when she would speak to me, even though she knew Spanish, she would feel so much more comfortable speaking to me in Catalan, which was so curious.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And then when you were in China, what was that like?
Oh my goodness. I was so shocked when I got there. You know, when you're gonna move to another country and so you start looking on the internet, looking for things about the country, looking for what people are saying, but nothing can prepare you for going. Like you have to go there. And I didn't speak a word of Mandarin when I got there. And it was so hard for me, just feeling really like stuck, not being able to communicate properly. And also the culture was so different in terms of just, the work culture, for example. It was really common for you to stay at work and do overtime unpaid because that showed that you were a hard worker. Other things, I guess, that were really big cultural differences was the food. Like the food that we get here in the UK that is supposedly Chinese food was not what we were getting there.
What did you have to eat in China? And I want to say really quickly, this is becoming a food podcast because I always end up talking about food with my guests. And then I'm like, wait, we're supposed to be talking about language, but let's talk about food. What kind of food did you encounter?
Where to start? So one thing that I discovered was hot pot. So it's from the Sichuan province.
Yeah.
And I guess for your listeners that might not know, it's like a big broth. Usually it's very, very spicy and just there bubbling away. And you would order, so you would go with a group of friends because it's this communal meal, and you would order lots of meats and fish, noodles, veggies, and then you cook your own food. And it's such a good experience. You can spend like 2 hours doing that together. That was just something that we didn't have here in the UK at that time.
Yeah, I know.
That was so good.
Yeah, I found that really tough. Like just when because in Australia, the Chinese community is quite strong in Sydney, and then moving to Italy, it's like really at the beginning, it was really hard to get like foreign food and like yum cha, like just I couldn't find it. And I don't think it's still not there. And I was like, oh, come on. Like, yeah.
What is yum cha?
Yum cha is like you go to the restaurant and they pass by with like trolleys of different dishes, and you sit around big round tables and you just take like different things and you share it in. It's very really nice, like big Chinese family kind of meals. You go often with friends and you have a bit of this and a bit of that, and then at the end it's a bit like the sushi train, like you pay for each plate that you consume kind of thing. And our Hong Kong Chinese friends like introduced us to it, and I mean they would eat dishes that maybe I not necessarily would eat, like they would go crazy for like chicken feet and stuff like that, but you'd get like fried seafood and just everything and just all these little dishes. So good.
Gosh.
Yeah.
I have to try it. Yeah. I think it's similar, like so I lived in Italy for a brief period as well, not as long as either of you have, but I remember like the first time that I was really in Italy, and what I knew as Italian food, coming from New York City, getting to Italy is like, oh, this is so different. And it's not, I always tell people it's not a competition of like who's better or worse or who's I prefer, because they both have they're both delicious, but it is very different. And I remember being just like shocked at how like here, our Italian food plates are um massive, and then you go to Italy and it's like, oh, this is a portion size. This is, this tomato, like I've never had a tomato so flavorful in my life than the time I was in Italy. But
yeah, no, it is completely different. Yeah.
So you both teach English, right?
We do.
Absolutely.
You do. What were some of the decisions that led you both to deciding that you wanted to teach English?
It's interesting how, for me, it was like my friend going, I'm going to go and teach English in Italy. And I said, yeah, okay, I'm going to do that. It was like but I didn't know what that decision really meant at the time. And then kind of when I go back and think about it, it's like, wow, I really loved English at school. It was one of my favorite subjects. I took extra units of English for my final years of high school. But it didn't seem like a subject that I would take on in a career. I was kind of very practical, a little like ambitious in my career choice. So I decided to study business, and which I did like and still happy with having chosen to study that. But yeah, so when I moved to Italy, I thought, great, I can combine business backgrounds with English and teach business English. So, and actually was quite enjoyable. But what I found was like after a year, I realized I had a bit of a identity crisis, I think, because I thought of myself as a business person with a career in business. And I realized I was turning into an English teacher. And I wasn't like, I don't know. Yeah, I was a bit like, oh, what does that mean? Obviously the salary was worse. So there was that factor at the beginning. I was like, oh, okay, what does this mean? But I just enjoyed it so much. So I found I'd gone from that office job of sitting in front of a computer and, talking to people. But my last job was kind of boring. And to sitting down with people, having conversations, talking about English. And the wonderful thing is that you're always right, because they say, oh, is that correct? And you're like, yeah, of course it's correct, because you're the native English speaker. But on the other hand, just like Italian students are wonderful, because you talk, you laugh every day, it's a people job, and that's just wonderful. And I just fell in love with it, and I've been doing it for more than 15 years now.
Oh, that's amazing.
So, yeah.
Terrific.
So with me, being an English teacher was actually never my plan. Because I loved languages so much, I thought, the best thing would be just spending my day working with languages. So I'll become a translator. So I studied translation and interpreting. And yeah, so I studied translation and interpreting, but actually never ended up working in that field with a paid job. So I did voluntary work with it, and also ended up in banking, which has nothing to do with languages or with English teaching. And it actually was 2014 that I started to get the itch to go abroad again, and spent my time in China. And I really loved doing that, but felt that when I came home, that's it. I wasn't going to do that anymore. I was going to go for a completely different job. But while I was looking for a job, I actually came across a charity that was working with asylum seekers and refugees. And one thing that they needed was volunteers to teach English classes. And I was like, okay, I can give my time, I can give my talents and help people. So I started doing that. And it was just one particular day. I was doing a one-to-one class with this lady who was lovely. She traveled like an hour each way to come for English classes.
Oh,
She was just so passionate about improving her level. And she would always hug me at the end of the classes and say, thank you so much. And I would see her making amazing progress. And I thought, do you know what? I really like this working one to one with people and just seeing their lives change because they can speak English or they can speak English better. And that's what
yeah.
made me change my mind. And I was like, oh, well, I can start working online.
That's incredible. What kind of students are you both working with now?
I focus on mainly busy professionals who need to communicate clearly in their work. So the focus is on exactly communication, maybe understanding, also confidence building too. You know, they have to deal with meetings and presentations where they feel, you know, maybe a bit inferior because their English is not as good as another colleague, and sort of helping them work on that. But I also have some kids as well and teens. I kind of do everything, and I can't give them up because I really love them too. So I just have a few, but actually I love them so much. And I don't know, like I don't think I could teach kids all the time, but I have a few sessions that I do each week where I sing and we play games, and I actually have a lot of fun doing that too. So
I love
yeah.
that.
Oh, and so for me, now I work with adults, no more children anymore. I loved them, but it's all adults. And it's basically adults that are learning for personal interest. And maybe they do use English at work, but they love English so much and they just want to keep growing with that language. But at the same time, they lack confidence for various reasons. It might be something that happened in the past where someone said to them, oh, I don't understand your English. You don't speak English well. And so they've had that thought in their mind ever since. So I work on building their confidence and improving their English skills.
Nice. And you also help people learn English through baking,
Oh, yeah.
right? Okay.
Yeah.
Do you
That
want to
was,
talk about that?
yeah. So I love baking. It's something I've done ever since I was a little girl, my grandma. And a few years ago, I really got back into it. And I was having a chat with someone one day, and I was like, oh, in my free time, I really love to bake. And they said to me, you should combine English with baking. And my first thought was, oh, maybe I shouldn't because this is my hobby. And sometimes you don't want to mix your hobbies with work. But then the more I thought about it, I thought this was a great idea because I feel that, for example, if you learn a language through a hobby, it takes that pressure off and it makes it more fun. So I dance salsa, for example, and that really helps with my Spanish.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, so that's why I decided to start doing that.
When I saw your page on baking and, English, I thought that was such a good idea
Yeah.
because I think not just because it's like a hobby that people, that people can do, but I think also at some point everyone is going to bake something, right? So it's really like such a practical thing to teach people through not just cooking, but like baking, because baking is so precise.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I really loved that idea and I thought it was just brilliant. I
Oh,
really thought it was
thanks.
so brilliant.
It's funny. I have difficulty like explaining the concept in like translating baking in
Right.
Spanish or Italian. Like there's not really the word. And there is obviously when you explain what it is, it's like there are words and verbs and things. But that I don't know, it's like quite English in some sense, like
It
baking.
is.
Yeah.
It really is. And I think what I was going to say is like sometimes when I travel, I like to pick up a cookbook from wherever I've gone. And when I get home, I'm like, oh, I don't know these measurements because they're metric.
Mm.
So a couple of years ago, I got myself a metric
The
measuring
cup,
cup.
measuring cup,
Yeah.
yeah.
From Tesco of all places. And I was so excited because I love Tesco, and I was like wandering around Tesco the whole, and that's the only thing I bought was this metric like cup. And so I try to get recipe books from like and magazines and things like from all over the world. So I think like that's one of those things when I think when you're learning another language, you don't often learn the intricacies of like a very specific thing that we all want to do. Like I think about like putting on makeup, like the process of washing and setting our hair, maybe working out in a gym. And I think baking is one of those things too. Like you really don't think about how much vocabulary there is
Yeah.
in baking something until you have to make like a bundt cake and you're like, oh shoot, I don't know the words in Dutch or whatever, and I don't know how to really. So I just thought it was like such an interesting idea, and I hope you keep doing it.
Oh, I will do. Yeah.
Audrey, you're in Spain now, so
Yeah.
but you started out in Italy. So how was that transition from teaching English in Italy to teaching English now in Spain?
Well, it was a little complicated because it kind of the move to Spain was also combined with having children. So my youngest was 9 months when we moved to Spain, and so I wasn't really sure like what was going to happen because I basically left all my students behind in Italy, but I actually managed to bring a few over like with online classes. And it
Oh,
got me
cool.
thinking about this, like, oh, this is handy, like being able to do online classes. And that's where I started to get the idea of like, I'd really like to work on learning in a different way, not classic classes, not having to go to companies and sit there for an hour and a half and teach adults that don't have much time and then probably will only come 50% of the time of the classes and then end up like not actually learning anything. And you're thinking, oh God, like what's the point? So this kind of, phase of like, it's got to be a better way. So that's where I've, in the last 5 years, kind of been exercising my creative mind to think of like, how can we make learning more flexible, especially for people with not much time. And so, I've been playing a lot with, audio recordings, video recording, just playing around with WhatsApp, all sorts of different apps, just how to make adult learning more fun. So, this moving to Spanish actual students wasn't particularly hard because they're like as funny as the Italians. So the language level is pretty similar. The mistakes are a little bit different, but very, very similar. So, but they're good fun students. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And you have a chance to work on your Spanish too, I suppose.
Yeah, you always with each when you teach. I mean, you don't speak a lot, but when people make particular mistakes, or sometimes they'll just ask you like, how do you say this? Or like recently we had like a discussion about an idiomatic expression that's in Spanish or what could be the one in English. Like you pick up stuff and it's good fun. So I like it. Yeah, no, it definitely helps with language learning. So yeah.
So I want to talk about your podcast. You don't say. How did the show get started? How did you two meet? How did you two meet, and how did you decide that you wanted to do this show? And I'm a fan of your show, so I would love to hear your origin story. How did you start, and how did you decide that this was the topic that you wanted to discuss with the world?
Yeah. Well, we got thrown together by Lindsay from Lindsay Does Languages because we were in her online teacher kit, and we got put together in a group. I think she put like similar like-minded teachers into groups in the sessions, and the idea was that you would meet once a month to talk about your teaching business and how things were going. So we had a group of, I don't know, there was 4 or 5 of us.
Yeah, 4.
I think maybe we had one call with 4. And then after that was just Abby and I. We were the only, like, you know, consistent ones actually chatting. Sometimes we'd send messages to the others and they didn't even respond. So
Yeah,
we just kind of kept kicking on, talking to each other. And I think it was me that kind of came up with the idea of a podcast, because I'd been struggling a bit with finding good podcasts for students to practice their English, but conversational English, and not being taught something, because there's a lot of podcasts which teach you something in the podcast, which is fine. But a lot of the times for adults in particular, they don't want to be taught things, but they just want to be exposed to natural language, and maybe a native level conversation can be a bit too challenging. So we like to think that sometimes we keep it a bit more simple, although sometimes we get carried away and talk fast and, you know. But this would be short, sort of 10, 15-minute maximum conversations about things that we like, which is travel, culture, because at the same time, we find that a lot of our students love traveling too, because when you want to speak English, it, you know, helps you travel a lot.
Yeah.
So this is kind of the idea. We both love podcasts.
Oh, yeah. We really do. Yeah.
So, and I think we kind of had been talking about it, but it came to a point during, was March last year, wasn't it?
It's actually, it's so 23rd of this month will be our 1-year anniversary.
Congratulations.
24th, sorry. Yeah. I think we were trying to get it going, you know, with all the busyness of other things when you're working. And then when everything changed last year, March, we said, oh, do you know what? This is the perfect time to do something for people that want to learn English that's a little bit fun. So let's do it. And so we launched.
That's so exciting. And tell us, for people who haven't listened to the show, tell us some of the topics that you've talked about and some of the people that you've spoken to on the show.
So some of the topics we've talked about, we've done quite a few of our country spotlight episodes. So that's when we take a deep dive into a particular country, talk about the food, of course, the language, maybe what education is like there, and a few other topics. And then at the end of that episode, we decide if we think we could live there for 6 months, and then ask our listeners if they could. So we've discussed Georgia, New Zealand, Malaysia was our first one. Some other topics that we've discussed. I remember our first episode, Audrey, was shoes on or off.
Exactly. So yeah, little fascinating cultural differences that we've experienced. So it's like, do you take your shoes off when you go into a house? We've done a great episode on superstitions, like how serious some countries take superstitions, etiquette, like what do you take as a gift, stereotypes, like just, like, of course, like weddings. We've done weddings, different like weddings are like amazing in different countries, the differences. So we love the diversity of the world, and we just have a good laugh at sometimes how things are so different too. So and you know, trying to give a little bit of insight, of course, into Australian culture, British culture, and also interviewing other native speakers, and also like we've had an interview with a Colombian guy who moved to the UK, so what kind of experience that could be. So always this idea of like cultural experiences, differences, how we feel when we travel, this kind of thing.
Yeah. I always enjoy the topics that you bring up. Like you said, weddings was one. Do you take your shoes off before you enter the house, and like things like that? And like, how do you come up with those? How do you come up with those questions?
Well, I mean, it kind of they come up in our class like lessons. So I find like sometimes I'm talking to a student and I like quickly note something down. Oh, that's a good one. Yeah. You know, like I have funny conversations with Italians about certain things that they find weird about British people, and then I might note something down about that, or I might find weird about them. And so I made that, and it's like, oh, how could we do that and talk about other cultures? So it could be current affairs, something that's going on as well. We like to do seasonal things like spring and winter, things like that. But we just kind of have this like spreadsheet, and as we think of things, we just pop it on.
Yeah.
How do you decide your country spotlights?
Wow.
Is it like someplace that you've always been curious about, someplace you've always wanted to go, or is it someplace you've already been, or maybe one of your students has been there and kind of sparked an interest in talking about the place?
I don't know. It's a bit random, isn't it?
Yeah. Do you know what? I'm going to be honest. Sometimes I'm like, okay, there's so many countries in the world. I'll go to one of those websites that has a random country generator, see what comes out, ask Audrey what country she'd like, and put it to a vote on Instagram and in our Facebook group. Yeah.
And then sometimes we get like maybe a contact is from a different country, like, you know, like I've got a colleague who's from the Czech Republic, and like, oh yeah, we can interview him, that'd be great. So sometimes it comes out a bit like that. But we were laughing in our last episode about Georgia because we realized we're always doing small countries. So we've got to come up with a big, highly populated one next. So
China.
It's like, how do you talk about China in like 10 minutes?
Exactly. It's going to be a multi-part episode.
I think so. Yeah.
I would love to know if in doing these country spotlight episodes, and I will say the Barbados one is the one that I think I really, really enjoyed. And just because Barbados has such a special place in my heart, in doing the research for those episodes that you have and having those conversations, what are some of the most interesting things that you learned that you didn't know previously?
Well, in the last episode, we found out that Georgia is the birthplace of wine.
You read my mind.
We were like, really? We wouldn't have picked that. Oh, and it was really exciting about Iceland. How was the percentage of how many people were going to publish a book in their lifetime? It's like a high percentage.
1 in 10?
1 in 10, or maybe even higher. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's cool. Yeah. Before I forget, please let us know where we can find you, your courses, and where we can listen to your podcast.
I think the main place to start is our podcast website. So www.podcastyouDon'tSay.com. So, and you can read a bit more about us. You can sign up for our newsletter. And then, you can link to our websites and follow our different programs as well.
Yeah.
Is it the best way?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, because we have our profiles on there, so it's easy to click across to our websites.
Yeah.
Awesome. Amazing.
And then, follow us on Instagram as well, because then you can vote for our country spotlights. Tell us, please, which big country we should talk about. So, I'm thinking maybe Brazil. That's my idea.
That'd be great.
I'm going to vote for Brazil. Yeah. I will add that information into the show notes so that people who are listening, they want to get in touch, they're able to click and find you and your show and your courses and your profiles and your Instagram right away. I want to ask you, what sort of advice would you have for someone who is trying to learn English? And what advice you would have for someone who is trying to learn another language?
My first, when you're at the first phase of the language, when you're going to get lots of vocabulary, is go to kids software apps that kind of stuff, like, you know, get down that like monotonous like language, but do it with fun. Like I was like doing like this Spanish English, it was like Mexican Spanish game, like clicking on balloons, matching the Spanish word with the English word, like boom 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 boom. But yeah, like getting all that like basic vocabulary like out of the way quick but fun, you know, fun way. So, and I was talking to Abby the other day, it's like, and there's so many like fun kids songs too. Like in Italian, there's like a verb song where there's like you dance and you do different verb movements. And there's like a Spanish song where you learn all the utensils, like the spoon, the fork, you make all the movements and stuff.
Oh, that's like, so cute.
So much fun to start off with, like the basics. Like you got to get down that first, 100, 500 words, make it fun. Yeah. And then Abby,
I would say for people learning, I think listening plays like such a huge part. I'm a real advocate for listening. I'd say TV series over movies, just because the language is repeated over and over again and you get familiar with it. So definitely that's just a great way. And obviously podcasts as well, and music.
Yeah. For people who want to travel and want to see the world and may feel uncertain of how to navigate a country where they don't speak the language that's spoken there, do you have any advice for people like that?
I would say even try to get to grips with the very basic phrases, the hello and the thank you and goodbye, because it can go such a long, long way.
Yeah. And the where is question. Where is the station? Yeah. Oh, please. Yeah, of course. Can I have maybe, a few things? Because it's like almost like even if they respond back to you, they'll probably like point or something like that. You're like, okay. It can be such, I don't know, like I remember when I first went to Italy, I was like, I'm going to ask this old lady, where is this street or something like that. And it didn't matter what she said, but I was so excited to actually ask, and she answered me back. So I don't know, like take it as like a game, like a challenge maybe, wouldn't it be so great just to like go up to somebody and say that. And as Abigail said before, people get so excited.
Oh yeah,
you make an effort.
Thank you so much, Audrey. Thank you so much, Abigail, for joining me in this conversation, this episode. I like to end each episode with the same question to both of you. Do you have any jokes, tongue twisters, cool slang words, idioms, words of wisdom, or words of advice in any of your languages to share?
Okay, I'll go. So I have a terrible joke in Spanish. It reminds me, it's from when I used to teach children, and it only came to mind today. So the joke is, ¿Cuál es la fruta más paciente? Espera. So in Spanish, espera is a pear. It's a pear. But also, if you put those two words together and make it espera, it means wait. It's terrible.
That's a good, no, I love a good joke.
It is good. Yeah.
And people rarely give me a joke to that answer. So I applaud.
Yeah. Well done. Yeah, today I was thinking about, I love in Spanish as well, the use of milk, la leche, in expressions. Like, es la leche means like, it means it's milk, but it's like really a good thing. Or tiene mala leche, like they're in a bad mood, like they have bad milk. That's like really cool, the use of milk in expressions. There's quite a few other ones as well. So if you're learning Spanish, you got to learn the expressions with milk.
Yeah. Is that something you'd hear in the region that you're living in, or all over Spain?
All over Spain. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I don't know about in other Spanish speaking countries, but definitely in Spain. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you again, ladies. I've enjoyed talking with you. And before I let you go, do not think about this hard at all, what in this situation would be the best way to say goodbye?
Adeu.
再见.
Saichen, adeu, Audrey, Abigail, and I will be talking to you soon.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.